Hi, this is Lawton Steele. In this video we're going to cover the basics of the interface of Blender. Let's go ahead and get started. Up in the upper left we have our usual menu. This menu used to be where we had all of the options that we needed to do various things in Blender. What they've done is they've moved a lot of those options, or most of them actually, to this area right here. And depending on what mode you are in, you'll see different menu options. So if I switch to edit mode, the menu options change. And this puts the menus up front so that you can actually access them right away rather than having to dig through these menus up here. Switching between the modes is just using this drop down, or you can hit tab to switch between edit and object mode, or you can hit control tab, which brings up a radial menu that allows you to select whatever mode you want to be in. You also have buttons up here that pertain to whatever tool you have selected. These are the tool buttons. So if I select a different tool, you'll see that these options change. So these are settings that pertain to the tool that you're trying to use. Also, you'll notice that at the very bottom of the screen, just underneath this timeline, you have help that pertains to whatever tool you have selected. So that's very important to understand, that if you need help, you don't have to go search in help. You just look down at the bottom of the screen and it tells you what keys do what things, or what mouse buttons do what things. Likewise, in the edit mode, we have a lot more tools. If I were to select this knife tool, for instance, and then I go to use it, notice that down at the bottom of the screen you have a bunch of keys and buttons that you can use to facilitate whatever that you want to do. Like, for instance, it says press enter to confirm, or escape to cancel, left mouse button, and so on. So each one of these buttons does something while you have the tool active and are using it, or if you're in the middle of using the tool. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's go back to object mode. In the upper middle we have settings for various things, like we have the grid here that we can turn on, and the grid can be set to use the grid increments, which you see here, these snapping points, or you can have it snap to vertexes, edges, faces, and so on, which makes it very handy. Let's say that I wanted to snap to a vertex. I would go over here into edit mode, select vertex select mode, which is this right here, and select a vertex. Then I can press G, which is grab, and I can move it over towards another vertex and it'll snap to it, or at least it should. Hang on a second, let me check something here. Okay, I've got it set. Let's see. For some reason there it goes. I got to move my mouse pointer over where I want it to snap. I forgot about that. I wasn't paying attention to my mouse pointer. So that's how you get it to snap that way. Likewise, you can do the same thing with edges. So I just need to be in edge select mode, and then I just select an edge, press G to grab it, and then I can have it snap to another edge. You can switch between the three different select modes by pressing 1, 2, or 3 above the keyboard, not the keypad, but the keyboard. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's snapping. Over here we have proportional editing. Let me take this box and select everything by pressing A. And then what I'll do is I'll go into mesh. Actually, I need to be in edge. So I go to edge and subdivide. and I'll subdivide it a couple times so that I get more vertexes or vertices, whatever you want to call them. And then what I'll do is I'll go into vertex select mode and I'll pull one of these in a direction. Notice that only it moves, right? None of the other vertexes are moving. So what if let me turn this off. What if I turn on proportional editing? What happens? Notice that it tugs at other surrounding vertexes so that they move in a uniform way with the vertex that I'm actually moving. So in that way you get proportional editing. When you start to deal with more than one vertex that you have selected, you start to get these natural movements of the other vertexes that are around the vertexes that you're moving. Likewise, you can use scale and it'll adjust. See how it's adjusting everything? Watch what happens if I turn this off. It's only scaling what I have selected. So proportional editing, very nice to have. In the right area up here in the upper right, you have the various display modes. You have wireframe, solid, and then you have a couple of shading modes which come into play when you're dealing with textures and whatnot. You can also press Z to bring up a radial menu to select whichever one you want. Like this one is called Material Preview, and this one is called Rendered. So you get to see different modes there. Up here you'll notice that as I am moving my mouse around with the middle mouse button, I'm holding it down as I move to rotate. You can do that without a middle mouse button by just left clicking and holding and moving that way. You can also switch different views if you don't have your keypad. If you don't have a keyboard with a keypad where you could normally switch between different views, you can click on these axes to do the same thing. So that eliminates the need for having a middle mouse button and or having a keypad on your keyboard. You can also use this to zoom in. See this right here? I just left click and hold and I can zoom. And then I can move the view like this. This is panning basically. And this will toggle between the camera view and whatever view you had. Then you can go into orthographic. So that's what those do. Down here on the bottom, this is a timeline for doing animations and whatnot. So really, unless you're doing animations, you're probably not going to use this. On the right here, we have our typical scene, which has our various objects in 3D. In the 3D view here, you'll see we have the cube, which is our cube, the camera, which is this guy right here, and then we have the light, which is a light source. And right now it's not being displayed because we don't have some settings set. We do have some lighting here. You can see some shading, but it adjusts according to your camera, as you can see. So really, this isn't being taken into account right now. You can turn visibility and or use of these off by just clicking here. And this is just a way, it's like a, think of it like a file or folder system. It's for quick organization and or selection of various items that are in your 3D space. And then below that we have the various options that we can go in and edit pertaining to various things. Down here we have modifiers that allow us to do various things to our mesh and so on. We have materials that we use for texturing. The materials will allow us to set materials on faces, or actually the materials are the faces, and then we can texture those. So we can designate whatever materials or whatever faces we want to be certain materials in here. So these facilitate a lot of different things. And some of these settings you'll have in the shading layout, which would be under these various nodes here, which will, you'll get into that much later when you're dealing with textures and whatnot. But you'll notice that I switched between layout and or modeling over to shading. And these are tabs that give us layouts that are conducive for the various workflow that we want to do. Like this one is for doing UV mapping for textures, and this one is for setting up textures and shading. And of course this one's for animations, rendering, and so on. You even have a scripting one here. So what you're probably going to be using most of the time is either layout or modeling, and you can switch between the modes no matter which one you're in. It's just that they're set up in such a way that the layout is better for what you're trying to do. You might notice that you have, let me go back here, you'll have this drop down over here up in the upper left. That's the same drop down that you used to have in the old Blender that lets you select various things. Even though you're in a certain layout like modeling, you can still switch between the various views, and then you could make your own layouts and save them as well. So that's pretty much the interface. I mean, there's really not a lot to it. If you press N, that brings out more options which pertain to various things. Like here we have a clipping setting where what that does is the closer you get to an object, the more chance you're going to be clipping into it. And I'll set the clipping to something a little bit coarser so you can see what I'm talking about. See that? That's clipping. That's when you go into the object. Now watch what happens if I set it for a lower setting. Notice that you can get closer before you clip into the object, and that comes real handy when you're trying to get really close and see something and work on it. So keep that in mind. So you got all these options here, to go in and explain what each one does. I don't even know what all of them do. It's just more tools at your disposal. They don't have to be confusing to you. You just have to know that there's all these options there, and that one day you might use them. In this one here, we have some options like I can turn on edge length, where I can see the edge length of what I have selected, and that comes in very handy. Like I can hit A for all, and you can see all the edge lengths. Very handy for determining if two edges are the same length. I use it all the time, to be honest. Another thing you can do is there's another setting in here. I'll just deselect that. Normals. If you click on this one, it'll show you what direction the faces are facing. In this case, if whatever face has a line on it, it's facing outward. So in other words, where that line is where it's facing. So all of these are facing outward. If I were to take and select one of these by going into face select mode and then going up here to normals and flip, notice that that line disappears because it's inside now. It's facing inward. And in this case, what would happen in Second Life is you would upload this and you would see that there's a hole here, and it would be transparent because the face is facing inward. But if you were able to see inside the object, you would see that that one face is textured on the inside. Here I'll go into wireframe mode so you can see that that one face is facing inward. See it? You can see all the lines are facing outward except for that one. And so sometimes what happens is your directions of your faces get flipped because it doesn't always keep track of those things necessarily the way you would expect, and so some faces might end up getting flipped during your modeling process. And so that's how you would go in there and flip them back. You would first check with this option to see if all the faces are facing the direction you want them to, and then you would go fix them. And you can adjust the line there. If you didn't notice that, let me go back. You can adjust it, like if you need a longer line to be able to see, you can adjust that as well. So those are some of those options. Really, I mean, that's the basics. There's really not much else. I mean, there are more options, various things you can use. This is a mirroring option here. But really, the workflow, you basically start modeling, you start using the shortcuts for the tools, which you can learn those. You can see the shortcuts right here. Like say I want to do scale, shortcut is S or Shift Spacebar, whichever one you want to use. Shift Spacebar is basically a menu, and then you can select and you can see the shortcuts. Very easy, and you can see all these shortcuts. Like G is for grab or move, and R is for rotate, S is for scaling, and then you know, some of the other ones like bevel is Control B. And what I'll do is I'll make a separate video that goes through some of these and shows you how to use them. Once you learn these basics, it's really simple. I mean, once you have those in your head, makes it a lot faster. But really, you can use these tool buttons instead, but just keep in mind that as long as that button is active, that tool is active. So you have to go back to move to get rid of that tool once you're done using it. So that's an extra step. So that's kind of something you want to keep in mind, is that you want to learn those shortcuts so you can do it faster. So that's the interface in a nutshell. I'm going to go ahead and hit N to kill that menu over there, or that window. That's just a side window. I don't know what they call it, but it was in the old Blender interface too. It just has some extra settings. I think one of these you can use to adjust, like you can adjust rotation and location. Let me look up here. One of these has the coordinates of the object. Well, it would help if I had an object, right? So I'll add a plane, and I'll see if I can see if there's, yeah, here we go. We can adjust the coordinate of the object by just doing this, or we can do like a -1, and it goes the other direction. So in that way, you can adjust the coordinate and move the object around. You can do that with vertexes as well. So all these options are really right at your fingertips. It's just a matter of knowing what the various things do, and then just using them. Like another one is modifiers. Modifiers allow you to do various things to your mesh. Like I can solidify this plane, for instance. This is a flat plane. It doesn't have any height to it. So if I do solidify, then I can adjust the plane's thickness like this. And I'm in wire mode, so I need to switch to solids so you can see that. And now I've just solidified my plane. So one thing to keep in mind is that this is not a solid object yet. It's still a plane until you apply this particular modifier. It's basically just showing you what it would look like when it's done. So to do that, you have to go back into object mode, and then you apply it. Now if one of these buttons turns it off. Let me see. There it is. See, so this is the effect it's going to do. This is what it actually looks like right now. So then to apply it, you just go into object mode and apply, and now it's done. It is a solid object now. You can go back into edit mode, and now you have the object that you use the modifier to solidify. Now you just could have just as easily taken the plane, right, and just extruded it with E. Let me go into edit mode, extrude, and then just dragged it down like that, and that would have done the same thing. Anyway, I'm going over what I wanted to share. In the next video, I'll pick a project that I want to do, and then what I'll do is I'll use this interface to get everything done that I need to do. And what I'll do with the project is I'll run through building it in Blender, then I'll set up materials, which will be faces, and then I'll texture it, and then we'll see it in real time by using these displays, and we'll also use the shading, which will give us these very confusing nodes. At least they seem confusing, but they really aren't. It looks like a lot, but really, believe me, it's not. We can apply textures and see it in real time, and what you're seeing back here, this blurry background, that background is like it's a lighting sample. So it's a scene that Blender takes lighting from and then applies that lighting, reflections and whatnot to your object. And you can import custom lighting reflection or lighting references. Like this one, you can see it right here. It's a picture of I don't know, some scene that it pulls light from. So it's pulling light from the sky in the picture. It's pulling light from everything. And so when you texture it, you'll see those, especially with glass. If you had glass, you would see the reflections of these trees and whatnot. But that's basically how you get your a unique unique shading and unique lighting and so on. Anyway, that's beyond the scope of this particular video. We'll get into some of that in the next video when I decide what I want to build, and we'll run with it then. So I thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.